So today we're just going to get started talking about science fiction. With science fiction, the biggest thing that you're going to run into is the fact that there are a lot of genre expectations. And unfortunately, with science fiction, there's about 30 different subcategories of science fiction. We're only going to talk about some of them today, not all of them, just because some of them have kind of waned in popularity. Doesn't mean they don't exist, but they've gotten to a point where they're borderline extinct. So as a result, I took out those ones and kind of just set them aside. We can talk about them if you'd like, but for the most part, I didn't even know they existed. They're so extinct. So we're going to talk about these ones, which are the ones that I am fully aware of, what the expectations are, and have run into them before. Okay, so the first genre expectation that you're going to run into is hard science fiction. Now, with hard science fiction, science and technology are going to take center stage. Scientific concepts could also just be explained in detail. So even if science and technology don't take center stage, they are a central part of the plot making sense, and everything that's happening making sense. So all of the explanation that you get is actually something someone expects. This one is slightly less popular, but that's purely because of the fact that a lot of people don't like being talked down to or having overwhelming amounts of scientific information given to them, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's not popular. Hard science fiction, there are some people who are an absolutely hard science fiction nuts, and they're like, hey, it has to be hard science fiction or I don't like it. But with that being said, that pretty much means that science and technology are up front and character and plot are going to take a back seat. That's another part of the reason not everyone likes it, is because of the fact that those of us who love character and plot don't like the fact that the character and plot are usually kind of just okay, whereas the science is very well done and very elaborate. The next one is the exact opposite. Soft science fiction. With soft science fiction, your expectations here are going to be that science and technology take a backseat. Yes, they are part of the setting. Yes, they are part of the weapons or whatever they're using, but it's going to take a backseat to being a more character-driven plot. These ones tend to be more popular purely because of the fact that with science fiction, there is a vast number of people who enjoy science fiction, but they don't necessarily want all the techno babble that you get with hard science fiction, which is part of the reason it's important to distinguish which genre you're going to be writing in, because that's going to change how you write the novel. If you're writing hard science fiction and you have some sort of cool techno gadget gun, then you're probably going to want to explain exactly how the techno gadget gun works. But if you're doing soft science fiction, you're probably just going to want to say, I have a cool gun, I gotta go pew pew. So it's probably more of a backseat to the character development. The next one is called military science fiction. Now, as it implies in the name, this is more of a distinctly militarized theme. Characters are often members of the military or are some sort of soldiers, or there's a war going on in the background even if they aren't a soldier. With military science fiction, this is going to be things more like Ender's Game, for example. They can be incredibly popular and can be super great. Honestly, I love some of military science fiction, but it can be hard to write because the expectation is that you're going to take military concepts from now and apply them to science fiction in the future. So with that, I would just say be careful that you either contact someone who's in the military so you can ask them questions, or do a ton of research to make sure that you got your military technology stuff, technology, military terminology, there we go, correct and properly situated. Alright, the next one is pretty simple. It's called robot fiction, probably also known more now as androids, but the science of robotics being the central theme. And there's actually quite a lot of these where an android is the main character, or an android is the sidekick to the main character, and androids have taken over the world, different things like that. That is robot fiction, primarily based in androids, robots, etc. That one is definitely a very popular one, even though it has very little expectations. The only expectation with robot fiction is that if you start with an android main character, you end with an android main character. That's about it. You gotta make sure that you keep the robots involved throughout the whole story and you don't just randomly drop them because you're not interested anymore. The next one is called social science fiction. Now, with social science fiction, you might know these better as dystopia or speculative fiction. They both fall under this category. Technically, dystopia and speculative fiction are their own categories, but they fall under the umbrella category of social science fiction. So, with social science fiction, it is future societies that are extrapolated or explained, and often how they are critiqued, usually for the purpose of social satire. However, science and technology usually play a big role in this extrapolated society. So whether it's like the Hunger Games, where science and technology have enabled it so that they have this great, crazy arena, right? Or the fact that in general, they're divided into districts, and some districts have almost no technology, you'll notice, but in the first district, I believe, they have an intense amount of technology. You almost can't escape it. There's flashing lights, there's costumes, there's people who are so dressed up that they literally have plastic surgery to make their face look like a cat. That is definitely sci-fi. So as a result of this, dystopia and speculative fiction fall under the category. Dystopia more leans towards the expectation that you're critiquing society in some way. So for example, with Hunger Games, it was critiquing the idea that we move so far forward that we move back to some of our barbaric ways, and that we are limiting people to certain class sections and certain subsections, and on top of that, the idea that there's this gladiatorial combat, that we needed entertainment so bad that we turned to turning other people into our entertainment. Or at least that's what I got from it. So with dystopia, you just got to keep in mind that that's generally where it goes, is that you have a central theme that you're critiquing about society as part of your social science fiction. Whereas with speculative fiction is a lot more, what if aliens came and visited? How would that change our society? So that one changes more of the social aspects of us and how we would react to certain situations. So with that one, you might run into, like I said, aliens come to the planet and the person writes about how instead of embracing the aliens, we turn them into slaves or something like that. With that, it's going to show us a critique of society and a critique of humanity through this speculative view and this idea of what might happen. All right, the next one is called space opera. This might sound very strange, but it actually is really cool, and you might know a lot of space operas when I explain what it means. So space opera typically refers to long-running science fiction series. However, a singular book can be a space opera because, for the most part, it takes over a series and it takes a long time, but that doesn't necessarily mean it has to. Yes? Like Star Wars. Yes, Star Wars could absolutely be classified as a space opera because the main points for a space opera are they're set in space, usually take place over multiple different planets, and usually have a large number of recurring characters that focus on epic fictional events, such as, it actually gets the example, a galactic war. So absolutely, Star Wars and Star Trek absolutely are both space operas, which is hilarious because I don't think anyone would ever call them a space opera, but they are. That is exactly what they are. Oh, Zai, can you grab there? So, I definitely agree with you there. That was an excellent point on that. Thank you for pointing that out. So with that, that's the reason it's typically long running, is because it has such a vast character set and it has such a vast setting set that it's hard to do with just one book. It's possible, but it's hard. It'd have to be a thick book, like Brandon Sanderson does, if you were to do a space opera in a single book. All right. The next genre of science fiction that we're going to talk about is steampunk, because yes, this is a science fiction genre. The expectations with steampunk is going to be that steam technology from the design aesthetic of the 19th and 20th centuries are going to be merged with some sort of futuristic view of the world. So for the most part, it's an aesthetic thing. So you're going to want to make sure they have the Victorian ball gowns for the ladies, and that the men have their dapper suits and fancy canes and things like that. It's more of how you set the society and making sure that STEAM technology is involved than anything else. That is the main genre expectation when it comes to steampunk science fiction. There are lots of ways that you can extrapolate from this and make it even more interesting, but that is the primary purpose of steampunk. All right, the next one, we're going to be going into all the punks because that's the way the list works. The next one is cyberpunk. Cyberpunk deals with the link between biology and computer technology. So this is going to be a lot of like cyborgs and a lot of humanity melding their brain with computer systems, virtual reality, prosthetics that move on their own and have a mind of their own, different things like that. So with cyberpunk, this is going to be things like Marissa Meyer's Cinder, where the main character is a cyborg, and and later on she gets on a ship, and the ship kind of has its own little AI system that talks, and her best friend is an android, and all these different things. Yes?
So what's the difference between cyberpunk and I forgot what it was called, that other one where robots are like the main character?
Okay, so the difference between robot science fiction and cyberpunk is the fact that with cyberpunk, it's specifically about biology and technology, whereas robot fiction, it is just robots. So as a result of that, with cyberpunk, you're going to see a lot more cyborgs, you're going to see a lot more humans befriending androids, things like that. So it's about the human and the robot aspect melding together, whereas with the robots, it's strictly robots. That is the main theme. So that was actually a very excellent question, because they are very similar. There's a lot of these science fiction genres that are very close to each other. So I would say that's the main difference, is just there's a lot more of an intense human element with cyberpunk, whereas the human element is almost borderline extinct in robot science fiction. Typically a robot is the main character, a robot takes the lead role, and they stay as the lead role. Alright. So the next one that we're going to talk about is biopunk. Now biopunk is how do I explain this? It's slightly less used purely because of the fact that it focuses more on biotechnology. When I say biotechnology, I don't mean cyborgs. It's really kind of funny. There are so many of these terms that are related to each other. When I say biopunk, I mean biotechnology, meaning genetic engineering, genetic manipulation, body modification, and eugenics. So these are more like with people melding their genes with cats to have razor sharp claws, or melding their genes with alligators to have crazy fangs or stuff like that. So that would be more of a biopunk, would be if you started melding animal genes with human genes or something like that. Yes, question?
Are we going to talk about like it's a mix between fantasy and science fiction like there is?
Mm-hmm. We're going to definitely talk about that. That is in the list. There's a huge list of different science fiction topics. But yes, absolutely. We are definitely going to talk about science fiction and fantasy and how that works.
Yeah.
Because it does blend together. There
That's
actually
one of
are
my-
sci-fi
that is-
fantasy.
That's one of my favorite.
It's great. Yes, absolutely.
In fact, people have great ideas. Solely based on that.
Yes. So I totally agree, and I love it for sure.
Wizards on a spaceship.
Yep.
You know.
Exactly. So yeah, I totally agree. It is definitely on the list. It is just a large list. So the next one is nanopunk. Now this one's, again, slightly less popular, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. This is primarily using microscopic machinery or nanotechnology. This one is a very niche genre, and not a lot of books are nanopunk because they tend to be something else in the nanopunk. So there'll be a military science fiction nanopunk. There'll be a space opera nanopunk. So nanopunk tends to be more of a subgenre than a main genre, but that doesn't mean it can't be. All right, the next one is actually a huge debate when I was doing research, and that is superhero fiction. Superhero fiction has been debated for a long time as to whether or not it counts as a science fiction. A lot of people say it does, though. Hence why I'm going to put it in the category, but if you don't believe so, that's totally fine. You can just go, no, I don't think so. So superhero fiction, the reason that I believe it counts as science fiction and that other people, when I researched, were saying it counts as science fiction, is that a lot of literature and media makes it have its own set of rules, themes, and characteristics. And as a result of that, it kind of becomes a science fiction because it's more the idea of if blank happened and caused superpowers, then X happens. So as a result, it becomes kind of science fiction-y, especially because a lot of superhero things are science fiction-y. For example, Captain America, super serum, definitely a science fiction concept. However, things like Superman, still science fiction. He's an alien, right? So that's part of the reason I was like, I kind of see superhero mixing with science fiction pretty well, but there are some people who see superhero fiction more as sci-fi fantasy, but I'll leave that debate up to you.
I don't really think that would count as science fiction.
But see, that's why I'm like, honestly, everyone's about 50-50 when I did research on it, so I'm like, I leave it up to you guys. Exactly.
It could, but not really.
I think it depends on how you do your superheroes too.
That's fair.
So yeah, so I agree. I
Then you
was
have
kind of on the fence too.
authors who like get really invested into science and make a science fiction book about it based on what they researched, like
Right.
Hail Mary,
Mhm.
or the Hail Mary Project, and The Martian.
No, absolutely, exactly. So it can be very intense as far as science fiction goes, and I honestly think that's part of the reason science fiction is such a broad genre concept, is because it's so intense that it encompasses a lot of different stuff. All right, the next one is slightly less popular. It's the Extraordinary Voyage genre. Now this one, it's pretty simple. They go on an extraordinary voyage that somehow involves scientific technology. This one was more popularized by Jules Verne, so Journey to the Center of the Earth, things like that. And so as a result of that, it's very popular, it's very cool. However, it definitely has become slightly less popular. I think it's because Jules Verne did it so well. Everyone just kind of like, you do you, Jules Verne. You're the best. I'm leaving. But that doesn't mean you can't do Voyage Extraordinaire, because of the fact that it is such a broad genre. Pretty much as long as you have a science fiction background of some sort and then have them go on a really cool journey, you're good. It's pretty simple. There's not a lot of expectations with that one because of the fact that it hasn't been done a whole time. The next one is Gothic science fiction. So this one is actually kind of one that I prefer, but that's mainly because I like Gothic stuff. So this is more like Frankenstein, where it takes place in more of a Gothic type of dark mythology, magic, and monsters kind of idea, but then you use science to explain mythology, magic, and monsters. So, for example, I thought the example they gave was really cool. Vampirism explained by a rare blood disease. That was a really cool one I found in my research. So, and then, like I said, Frankenstein, where it's like there's this undead monster, but instead of it being, just rising up from the dead because magic, it's the guy literally created this thing. So as a result of that, Gothic science fiction is more just dark, twisted mythology blended with a scientific explanation of some sort. Alright, the next one is mundane science fiction. This one is slightly less popular, but that does not mean it's not popular. The current genre expectations for mundane science fiction are primarily more modern day. So when I say mundane science fiction, it just means that we have a lot of the technology we do now. So we have cell phones, we have laptops. Exactly, except for the fact that some random mad scientist has created some sort of monster to destroy the world. But elsewise, the world is exactly as it would normally be. So that's why they call it mundane science fiction, because it's not intense, a whole new world, a whole new weapon set, a whole new everything. It's just...
Frick, what is that?
Exactly, what's that? What's that? No, it's more just, if modern society had a random mad scientist make a monster, how would we handle it? So it's a little bit more low-key. Alright, the next one, of course, is science fiction horror. This one is pretty popular. A lot of people do sci-fi horror, sci-fi thriller.
I was working on a book a lot like this earlier, but then I said, Wizard cats, why not?
Exactly. Honestly, go where the muse takes you. But with science fiction horror, it's pretty much self-explanatory. It's blending the genres of science fiction and horror. So you're going to have something that's mysterious and kind of unknown, and that's the beauty of science fiction horror, is the fact that most horror is best well done when something is mysterious and unknown and kind of vague and elusive, but at the same time still scary. That's part of what makes it so scary, is the unknown factor, which is part of why sci-fi is so great. Because with sci-fi, there's a lot we don't know, right? Especially, I mean, I don't know. Maybe there's a lot that people know who are more scientifically inclined than me. But for me,
heck, maybe this world is so mysterious that the author of it only knows like 30% of what they do.
and there you go. And I mean, like, even a normal average person, if you don't get a chemistry degree or a physics degree, you don't know a lot of what science does, right? It's a very much an unknown factor. So if someone takes that unknown scientific idea and then makes it into a horror, it's a lot easier because of the fact that we're facing something so unknown and so strange. This is why science fiction horror alien movies are so terrifying, because the idea that an alien could be out there and be like a crazy parasite and, you know, possess you or something is definitely a possibility, scarily enough.
I mean, there are like, the universe is basically just infinite.
Exactly.
There is a
Even
high
on
percentage
Earth, we
that
have
is a thing.
Exactly. Even on Earth, we have crazy parasites and things like that. So the idea that like one exists in space, not out of the possibility. So
Honestly, if scientists discover that there's life in our next door galaxy, the Andromeda galaxy,
Mhm.
I'm not gonna be surprised.
Yep, exactly. Not gonna be surprised either. Well, so the next one is science fiction
I
comedy.
mean, I'm gonna be surprised with what they find, but I'm not gonna be surprised we've got life on it.
Fair enough. The likelihood that they wouldn't is so small. But with with science fiction, the next one is science fiction comedy. This one's pretty self-explanatory. You all get a bunch of people on the spaceship making jokes. You know, you have a bunch of science fiction type of stuff, and you have a lot of jokes that are science fiction based. All right, and then here we come to yours, science fantasy or science fiction fantasy. So, with science fiction fantasy or science fantasy, it works the boundaries of science fiction and fantasy. Now, this is the tricky one. This is why genre expectations are so important to talk about when it comes to science fiction, because unfortunately, they're very precise. There are a lot of certain things that you just have to hit the bullet points, or else your readers are going to be a little bit disappointed, a little bit confused, and so it's important to stick to the genre that you picked, or if you're going to branch outside of the genre, like with science fiction and fantasy, you make sure that you blend both genres equally. You don't favor one or the other.
There's a
Mhm.
there's a comic book series called Amulet.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Amulet. I love that one. So.
It's really good, yeah. So with science fiction and fantasy, it takes concepts that belong in science fiction, so space travel, robots, aliens, etc., and they appear alongside those with fantasy, so magic, mythology, etc. And as a result of that, I actually love science fiction and fantasy for the reason that a lot of science fiction sounds like fantasy if you were to explain it to someone from 100 years ago, right? Because science sounds like magic for those who don't understand it. Like if we were to tell someone, you know, from Pilgrim times, hey, guess what? I have a magic box that I could go, hey Google, what is 4 miles in feet? They would be like, witchcraft!
Or I can cook food
Yes.
in a box.
I can cook food in a tiny box.
Boom.
I also have a box that makes things cold. Like, it sounds like magic. It sounds like witchcraft. And so I think that's the beauty of sci-fi fantasy or science fantasy, is the fact that you're blending stuff that people know with stuff that could potentially happen, but seems like fantasy because we've never actually run across it.
Yeah, I mean honestly, if we're talking about like caveman and or like medieval,
Mm-hmm.
and we take out a computer.
Exactly,
and
the
we just
computer's
press
gonna
one
seem
key,
crazy.
They're probably just gonna throw us into the witchcraft.
Exactly.
They're probably gonna burn us in the
Which is
influence.
why sci-fi fantasy is so beautiful, is because you can take what we do know and blend it with what we don't, and it fits. But with genre expectations, going back to genre expectations for science fiction and fantasy, you're just going to want to make sure that you blend just as much fantasy as science fiction. Because if you market it as sci-fi fantasy, you want to make sure that you hit all the science fiction notes, you also hit the fantasy notes. Because otherwise, it's not sci-fi fantasy, it's sci-fi with fantasy elements or fantasy with sci-fi elements. It has to hit both. Alright, that being said, then we have the five apocalyptic science fiction genres. Yes, there are 5. There's apocalyptic science fiction, post-apocalyptic science fiction, zombie fiction, alien invasion, and alien conspiracy. 5.
Isn't that basically the same thing as Alien and post-apocalypse and the apocalypse?
See, I will explain the difference. I will explain the differences because there are actually differences. So, apocalyptic science fiction is fiction concerning the exact cataclysmic event. So, for example, if the zombies were to have been raised up, apocalyptic science fiction would be like if we were standing in this room and then all of a sudden zombies became a thing. That would be apocalyptic science fiction because it's happening right now, present tense, in this second. Things go from being normal to absolutely not normal in a split second. That is apocalyptic fiction.
It's like, why?
Exactly. Things go from being normal
Welcome
to
to
drastically
Ohio.
not normal. The next one is post-apocalyptic science fiction. Now these are very similar, but the difference here is that it's already happened.
Yeah,
It's been here. It's been here for a while. We've all adjusted,
or not.
or not, or we're
For all
dead.
we know, we could be living in anarchy.
Exactly. So we've all adjusted, however that is, whether it's anarchy or whether it's we've made our own little society with walls to keep the zombies out. You know, somehow we've adjusted.
Or kids living in a treehouse.
Yes, or living in a treehouse. Exactly. So somehow with post-apocalyptic, and sometimes apocalyptic fiction can become post-apocalyptic if it is part of a series. So for example, like you mentioned, The Last Kids on Earth. Yes. There I was like, shoot, I forgot the title. The first book is absolutely apocalyptic fiction because it's new, it's happening right then. But the rest of the series then is post.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, absolutely,
Well, like,
they're very
half of the
similar.
book-
But
Like half of the book is like
mhm.
apocalypse, and then the other half is post-apocalypse. And then
Right.
The rest of the series.
So that's typically how apocalyptic fiction works. Apocalyptic science fiction is it happens and then you adjust. Whereas post-apocalyptic fiction is the adjustment has already happened, you just didn't see it. Alright, so the next one is zombie fiction. Now, as we just talked about, zombie fiction is incredibly popular with post-apocalyptic and apocalyptic fiction.
Why not? It's zombies.
It's zombies. So with that, the expectation for zombie fiction is just the fact that you have zombies, you somehow explain why there are zombies, whether it be fantasy or science fiction. Generally, if you're going to do zombie science fiction, it's going to be more sciencey, whereas if you just have zombie fiction, hey, you could do a magic voodoo spell. So there's a lot of liberties here. It fits under the science fiction genre, but again, a lot of these fit under an umbrella, so they're kind of broad. The main thing with zombie fiction is more just the fact that at its core, zombies are the main problem. You don't want to have like a dozen problems and zombies are just one if you're doing zombie fiction. You're doing zombie fiction, it's just zombies. You can have it where zombies are just one of the many problems, but that would probably be more post-apocalyptic or apocalyptic fiction instead of zombie fiction. Zombie fiction is strictly zombies are the issue. Alright. Then we have the next apocalyptic problem, alien invasion. Because apparently we can't come up with enough ways to destroy ourselves in fiction. Alright, the next, so with alien invasion, the main thing that you're going to want to focus on is just aliens invade Earth either through military conquest, some sort of political subversion, or they're trying to mass extinct the planet.
Yay.
So there can be 3 different ways of doing it. With the alien invasion, it can be either subtle or it can be very direct. So very direct would probably be more like it's a military conquest and they're like, we will take over your planet. Whereas with alien invasion with a political subversion, you might not even know they're there. that's more falls into kind of like alien invasion slash conspiracy, where it's like, are all of our politicians secretly aliens?
Yes.
What?
Have you seen that Studio C?
I have not.
It's like they kill the president that has like the tentacles that's obviously an alien, and then they replace it with the president. The president's like, this will never happen again, and she's an alien. And they're all just idiots.
I love that. I've never seen that one. I should see that one.
Yeah,
But yes,
watch that
so
when I get home.
that is honestly the kind of the same idea, where it's like it's much more subtle. That one's obviously comedic, but generally it's much more subtle, where it's like, oh yeah, secretly these alien bugs are taking over the politicians' brains, or things like that. You know, kind of a little bit more like people might not even know it's happening, but someone does for whatever reason. You know.
That just reminded me of a comic book series called Pinky the Space Cat. And you gotta read that one.
That sounds
you're
adorable.
gonna get it. It's hilarious.
Alright, the next one is alien conspiracy. So with alien conspiracy, it's different from alien invasion because generally this is more like you interact with alien life and the government's trying to cover it up. Whereas with alien invasion, even if the government's trying to cover it up, you're fully aware of what's going on. And not only are you fully aware, but generally the aliens are trying to take over. In this one, the aliens aren't trying to take over. They just exist, and someone figures out about them, and the government's trying to cover it up. So this one's more like Race to Witch Mountain, if you've seen it on Disney.
That's the one.
Exactly. But that's more alien conspiracy, because the aliens aren't trying to take over the planet. They're just trying to come get their thing and leave. Right? No, trying to leave out spoilers.
No, we're like, you're gonna try and take over our planet. The books prove it.
Exactly. So it's like with
And
that.
you go, pew pew.
So with that, alien invasion and alien conspiracy can be blended, but they technically are definitely two separate genres. One is more intense with aliens, and one is more like, oh, aliens are just like us. How can we help them when the government's trying to not help them? And it's kind of more government versus person standing for alien rights. More of. Not always, but that's definitely more of the common thread, more of the common expectation. All right, the next one is, of course, the classic, time travel. With science fiction, time travel, the expectations for time travel are just that someone travels in time, somewhere, whether it be to the future or the past, and this person merges and either creates some sort of alternate history or somehow fixes something in the past so that the future becomes an alternate history.
Have you read the
Yes.
History of Reality?
I have not, unfortunately. It is one of my many, many to-be-reads.
The first book is good, and then the series just kind of copies the same plot, and so
That's why with time travel ones, unfortunately, it's tricky not to do that. I completely agree. Because of the fact that with time travel, there's only so many things you can do with it. So I would say typically, at most, you could do 3 before it gets old.
and it's bound, not learning.
Oh, gotcha. Nope. Once again, no. Unfortunately. But yeah, that's pretty much how it goes. With time travel, is just the fact that it, unfortunately I haven't read that one either. Again, another one of the ones on my long to-be-read list. But with that one, with time travel, I would say if you're gonna do a massive series on time travel, you're gonna have to start falling into multiverse stuff. Just because multiverse will help spice it up, make it a little bit more interesting, make it a little less repetitive. Whereas if you just do time travel, they go to X time, they come back to X time. It changes time in Y way. It gets kind of whereas if you do parallel universes and you're like, oh crap, I spilled a slushie, and it turns out that slushie being spilled on that person is what made them go do this thing, and that was a very important thing. Changes the whole universe, and so-and-so's president now instead, or something, I don't know. But I prefer personally that that's not a genre expectation.
Slushies on people is illegal.
But yeah, time travel, it's definitely something that I think I prefer, and I think other people prefer, if it's something little changes something big, purely because something big is obviously going to change something big. But the idea that you could go back in time, kick over the wrong leaf, and that could cause a cataclysmic event, makes time travel so much more intense and so much more interesting.
Yeah, for all I know, if I travel back to this exact point in time, smack him in the face, for all I know, he could be president.
I don't know. Who knows how the universe changes? So, the next one is kind of akin to that, except this doesn't involve time travel actually. It's called alternate history. Now, the expectation with alternate history is purely you as an author are saying, what if X happened? So, for example, there's a book called Man in the High Castle, and I believe it's been turned into a TV series at this point. I have never read it myself, so don't read it because I'm not sure what's in it. But I've heard it's good. And the whole concept is, what if the Nazis won the war? And how it changed the entire world. And what they think the world would have looked like, what they think things would be like if the Nazis had won the war. And so with alternative history, there's no time travel involved. It's just the author saying, what if? And then creating a whole universe based on one what if. And it can be a tiny what if too. It can be a tiny what if, like, what if all cats suddenly disappeared or something? How would that change society?
No cat videos!
How would that change society? Or it can be something as big as, what if the Nazis won the war?
If you're wondering stuff like that, you buy the What If books.
Yeah, that's true. Those
Or
are
you
good
go
ones.
to xkycd.com and
So, but yes, so with that, I would say alternate history can be definitely very interesting, especially because you get two people. You get the science fiction people who are definitely very interested, but you also get the historical fiction people who are very interested. Because the thing about historical fiction is you can only read so much historical fiction before you've read it all. So as a result, it's fun to have the alternate histories because then you have two sets of people. You have two audiences that are coming together. And I will say, the only thing you have to be careful of, is that you have to, the neighbors next door are very rowdy, that you have to make sure with alternative realities that the main thing with alternate history, holy crap, they're making it very hard to concentrate. Alright, the main thing is just that you gotta do your research because of the fact that you will have some history buffs who want to read your work. So it's just important to make sure that you explain why things are the way they are. So for example, if Nazis took over the world and you explain, oh, the world has been split up into different countries and now German is the main language, some of that is obvious, but the split up into different countries, you might want to explain, well, I extrapolated based on this, that. You might not say that in the novel, but you might say that in the acknowledgments, or you might explain how things worked in your brain, in your opinion, through the novel. Yes?
You also have to do like some like research, like
Absolutely.
for example,
Research is crucial.
Part of the story
Mhm.
was that the Nazis winning the war meant
Yeah.
that Hitler was not killed. or
Yes,
whatever,
exactly.
assassinated. You would want to include him in there,
Mhm.
and instead of like coming up with some name of, oh, he's the one who did all this stuff,
Right.
and he's the one who was in charge of everything.
Mhm.
This guy named Chris. You have to include what was actually in it. You can't just bend it.
Yeah, you
to
can't
whatever
change
you want.
history. Even if you're doing alternative history, you can't change what history actually did or didn't happen. So for example, with that, like you were saying, you can't just say, oh, all of a sudden it's this guy named Chris instead of Hitler. Hitler would still have been in charge. So I definitely think, yes, that's an important note, is that even if you're doing alternative history, so you're kind of extrapolating, you have to extrapolate based on actual facts, not just based on whatever the heck you want. Absolutely. Very, very great comment. Thank you. The next one is kind of similar. This is more multiverse level stuff, but parallel worlds. So this one actually, it's kind of hilarious. There was one on Disney. I can't fully remember what it's called because it was originally done by their French department, and so the mouth reading was kind of off. So I only watched about 3 episodes, but because they had, done the English translation, but obviously they're speaking in French, so it's the lips are not in sync. It was kind of bothering me. But they did a parallel universe thing where the idea was there was this electromagnetic pulse that went out. And as a result, it sent some people forward in the future and some people back in the future. But as a result, it created 2 parallel timelines because of the fact that in one timeline, these people disappeared and they grew up without them and they never knew why they disappeared. Whereas in the other timeline, they never disappeared. And so it created kind of this very weird, wonky parallel universe thing going on. With parallel worlds, you just have to make sure that the world is only slightly different from our own. With time travel, it's okay if you say, hey, they spilled a slushie on someone and it changed the whole world. Whereas with parallel universes, you have to make sure that they are pretty similar. pretty lined up. Like,
That's the 13th reality.
so there you go. So that's why I'm like, science fiction is so broad, and there's all these subcategories that, like you said, the 13th reality versus found versus. So there's all these different kinds of genres that are very similar to each other. Absolutely. With parallel worlds, I would say the other one you can do is multiverses. However, with multiverses, have at it. Go as crazy as you want. Your universe can have unicorns if you want. that one has a little bit more liberty, but it's also more of a new science fiction concept. All right. Even though it's a really old concept, it's only just becoming more popular. So the next one is Lost Worlds. Believe it or not, things like Atlantis or El Dorado, technically science fiction, because of the fact that they could theoretically exist, which is what makes them scientific. Now, if you add something like fantasy, it's more like sci-fi fantasy, but it's still sci-fi fantasy because it could actually
I
exist.
thought like the legends counted as fantasy, so all the myths and legends could be.
So legends don't count. Lost Worlds is more like when they come across the actual place. So a legend is purely fantasy because you've never actually come across the place physically. People claim to have, but we have no proof. Whereas with Lost Worlds, they have proof. This would be like if the movie Atlantis, if any of you have seen it, where he physically goes in a submarine, physically finds evidence of this underwater subculture called Atlantis, right? That is more of a Lost World science fiction because it has actual facts, or facts, they're obviously not real, but it has actual supposed like science involved. He has to get a submarine, he has to do research, he's a professor, all these different scientific based things to get to this Lost World. So it takes the legend and makes it real, and that's what makes it science fiction. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I like to make sure that I explain things properly. All right, the next one is dystopian fiction. We kind of already talked about that, but basically it's when someone tries to build a utopia, so they're trying to make the world a better place, and it actually ruins the world and makes it a terrible place. This is why I mentioned the social satire science fiction earlier, and it falls under that category. Please stop moving the table, it is incredibly distracting. And I'm not blaming either one of you, just blame the table. Alright, so next one is space western. Now this might sound weird, but it's absolutely a thing. A lot of people accuse Star Wars of being a semi-space western because of the fact that they have a lot of gun standoffs. They're in a lot of bars. They're just alien bars. And so with a space western,
Also epic sword fights,
yes, true.
except not sword fights. Laser sword.
Exactly. So as a result of that, it's like, that's why I say a lot of people accuse it, but it's not necessarily. So it depends on your view. With that being said, it has a lot of the ideals of the American West, if not all of them. However, it's set in space. That's pretty much it. And believe it or not, people don't even know that this genre exists. They're just like, wow, that's a cool sci-fi. Like, that's a space western. So it's actually a lot of things hide under the guise of being just regular science fiction. All right. I am going to now move on to more of the rest of the tips and tricks. Now, the reason we focused on genre expectations so heavily and spent the first 3/4 of the lesson on it is because of the fact that science fiction, like I said, has so many subgenres. And so as a result, it's important to know what those subgenres contain and don't contain because of the fact that that is going to help guide your story. You can only do so much research, you can only do so much of this, but if you have preset expectations by your readers and you don't follow those, then it doesn't matter how good you do at the rest of these things because your readers expect X, and if they don't get X, they're sad. It would kind of be like going into a story with a unicorn on the front cover and unicorns never appear. You're sad.
So like Alcatraz book 2 would never go into space.
Exactly.
Alcatraz book 2, the American cover has the original covers have them in space. They never go to space.
Yep. That would
That's
absolutely
probably
be part of that.
something they did on purpose.
They probably did that on
Yeah,
purpose. Just
they
because it's Alcatraz.
definitely did.
They definitely did. Anyway, so, but that's more expected. That's because it's satirical. Okay? He's very much a prankster. So as a
I
result of
love
that makes yes. So that makes more sense. But if you're a regular writer who isn't Alcatraz, and you're like, hey, I have and a unicorn on the cover and a mermaid, and unicorns and mermaids never show up, and it's a historical fiction, you're going to be very sad. So that's why we talk so much about genre expectations, is because of the fact that it can make readers very disappointed if you don't get your genre expectations right. Now, if you weren't here for all of them, that's okay. I obviously have it all recorded online. We talk about all the different genre expectations for pretty much every subgenre. I took out a few, but those are the ones that are pretty much extinct. Yes? The YouTube videos? You go to YouTube
American Fork
and
Library YouTube channel.
if you go to YouTube, you just type in American Fork Public. You type in American Fork Library.
Podcast or
It's on YouTube, and if you need to, I have been sending out the emails, and the emails has a little link to our YouTube page as well, so you can check that. Yeah. So there's that, but you can also just type in American Fork Library onto YouTube, and it'll at least the American Fork Library thing will pop up. You have to click on our little like profile that looks like the American Fork Library to pop up all the videos, but
Whatever latest one should show up.
yeah. Oh, okay. Okay, no worries. Updating emails happens all the time. All right. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is a lot of science fiction, as we know, as you guys may have noticed when I was going through all this, stems from real life situations and kind of a what if situation. So the best science fiction, I would say, is a what if. So, for example, part of the reason Ray Bradbury rings so true for most people is because of the fact that he said, what if we took, the Walkmans that we have currently, where, you have the headphones and everything and the radios, and instead we had seashells, aka Bluetooth. Literally, that's what it is. He just got the name wrong. Because literally, it's a tiny thing you put in your ear and you hear the radio. Bluetooth. But it's crazy because then he also talks about other things like flat screen TVs that are massive. He had a tiny box TV and he went, I bet one day we're going to have TV screens that are so big they take up a whole wall. Yup. So part of the reason...
or the movie theater, bro.
Or the movie theater, exactly. But see, that's why it's so interesting to have all of these kinds of ideas with science fiction, because you're taking what's happening now and saying 200 years in the future, well, what's that going to look like? Kind of like, for example, in medieval times, they probably never ever would have said, hey, we're going to have electric lights someday. But someone eventually said that, right?
I think somewhere in the medieval times, I'm pretty sure most of the guys were like, this is the peak of humanity.
Exactly, this is what we got, man. But that's the beauty of science fiction, is that you say, based on what we have now, could we do something? So I would absolutely say that is the pinnacle of where you want to start your book, is say, if X is the base and we did Y, how would the world change? What would it look like? All right, the next one is don't overwhelm your readers with too much explanation up front. Kind of let the world build itself. Tell them what is important and crucial to know as part of the plot as it goes. Don't say like, and guess what? I'm going to tell you the names of all 300 crew members on this ship.
Dang it.
Holy cow. Maybe not. However, if you introduce them one by one and kind of have like one chapter you meet one person, another chapter you meet another person, and by the end of the book you know the whole crew, great.
300 chapters?
That would be intense. But I'm just saying theoretically.
Brandon Sanderson, anyone?
Also fair.
Oh, you can have like 150 chapters.
But he could have 300, he'd just have to have shorter chapters.
My guy creates.
That is also true, because the fact that he only keeps about 1/3 of what he originally
Yeah,
does.
100 chapters
I didn't even
times
thought about
3
that.
is
Honestly,
300
I think
chapters.
Because I don't have very large chapters in my book, I'm just going to make up for that by including many more words, or many more chapters.
That's fair, and that can absolutely be a thing. Anyway, so with that, try not to overwhelm your readers. Don't just be like, here's a giant dumping list of how my world works. It's okay to take your time. Take it slow, don't overwhelm
Because I
them.
want to tell people what how my world works. I'm so excited about it.
I know, it's so hard not to, honestly, it's really hard. It's really hard. The next one is keep your characters real and deep. Now, I know I mentioned at the very beginning of this video that the expectation for hard science fiction is that characters and plot take a backseat to depth of science. However, that does not mean you have to do that. That just means that is typically the genre expectation, so if you do, you're okay. However, I would say the best science fiction have real and deep characters that we can relate to. What?
Ender's Game.
Exactly. Ender's Game. Where it has
So
a
good.
massive concept, but the reason you are interested is because of characters,
Because
right?
of the characters.
Exactly. All right, the next one is pinpoint your central conflict in your story and let it guide your plot. So this is definitely a thing with science fiction because of the reason like dystopia. So for example, Hunger Games. The whole point is she gets thrown into this gladiatorial combat in this futuristic society, right? That's the whole thing, pretty much. So as a result, that is what she's letting guide the plot and the conflict in the story. So the conflict of, volunteering instead of letting Primrose go. The conflict of the games themselves and the people she loses. The whole conflict is around that central topic. So with that, just make sure that whatever science fiction concept you pick, you center it around that concept. That's what makes science fiction so easy, is that you don't have to worry a ton about like all this crazy stuff, because all you have to do is just say, if X happened, boom. That is your concept. Moving right along. Kind of an idea. All right. The next one is make sure your rules are consistent and well thought out. With science fiction fantasy, you can get away with this a little bit more. However, not entirely. It is important that you have rules. It is important that your world building is well thought out, because of the fact that anything that has science base means that you're going to have some readers who like science. And people who like science like logic. And they want their rules to work. So even if you have wizards in space, or you have fairies in space, or whatever have you.
Space fairies.
Or if you have things like that, you got to make sure that if you have that, you still have an explanation for why they work, why they're there. And even if it's not a huge explanation and you're just like they're an alien race, or if they are, they don't know what they are and they don't know how they originated, you have to still have some rules to help ground the reader, because of the fact that that's what science fiction readers like. And so they like to be grounded at least a little bit. Even if there's a ton of fantasy concepts that leave no grounding, they just leave them to the wind. That is okay, because of the fact that there's something grounding them, even if it's small. All right, the next one, obviously, as we've talked about several times, do your research and take copious amounts of notes when you do your research, because trust me, even if you think you'll remember right now the exact name of that brain parasite that you need for zombies, you won't remember it in a month. So make sure when you do your research.
Big brain. Unless you're whatever they're dreaming.
But yeah, so with that, make sure that you keep your notes written down, especially because even if you do remember all that, eventually over time the research is going to overwhelm you. Especially depending on what kind of science fiction you're doing. Some science fiction you can get away with, whereas other science fiction is like, holy crap, I took a whole notebook of notes, kind of a thing. So with that being said, when you do your research, just make sure that you keep a notebook or a file. I keep files because I lose notebooks. But if you keep track of your notebooks, good for you. Use a notebook.
Then you lose your files.
But then you
And then, because
See,
of
this
the
is why I use
computer,
Google
it's gonna
Drive.
get a lot more complicated.
This is why I use Google Drive, because then I'm like, I know exactly where it is. Because, amen, losing things is very real. All right, last point that I'm going to mention. If you have a message to your story, so for example, dystopia or any sort of military science fiction, in other words, science fiction where you're critiquing society in some way, like with Ender's Game, for example. If there's a message to your story, make sure you don't beat your readers over the head with it. Let the message be told naturally. So for example, if the author of Hunger Games wanted the message to be that we need to treat all people equally, and that we need to stop being so caste system type of idea, then she absolutely nailed it, because she didn't beat us over the head with it. She didn't keep having her whine about, hey, the caste system, the caste system, the caste system, oh no, the caste system. It's like, that would be annoying, right? You're like, okay, we get it, the caste system sucks. However, if you just show how it sucks, then the readers are more interested. The reader's like, oh yeah, it does suck. Because they're discovering it for themselves instead of having the author be like, do you hear my message yet? So and that's part of the reason why as kids, it's sometimes really boring to read those stories, that are like, when you're mad, don't hit your brother, or things like that. And you're like,
But I want to hit my brother.
right, but then with that, it becomes such a moral drivel that it doesn't have much of a plot, right? It's just morality, morality, morality. And that's what you have to be careful of if you're doing any sort of science fiction that is social satire. Yes?
Versus like if you say like this is like it hurts a lot to hit your brother.
Like you
it's
show
they're
the example.
figuring out
Yes.
themselves. Oh wait, there's like reason behind this.
Yes, exactly. Showing and demonstrating that. So if someone was to write a story about someone hitting their brother and then their brother runs away and they're like, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have done that, that would absolutely show and demonstrate that morality instead of just saying, don't do the thing.
That was me. I hit him and he runs away. Probably because he's big, but he runs away and I'm like,
Oh dear, maybe this is a bad example. Anyway, but the point is that yes, that is absolutely correct. You want to make sure you show your messages. You don't just beat your reader over the head with it, telling them about 1,000 times. So if you're going to do any sort of dystopia or things like that, just make sure you keep the message subtle. You don't make it very, very obvious. All right, do you guys have any questions about science fiction? Any things that you're like, I'm concerned about X in sci-fi, or I've never tried sci-fi because of blah reason, and do you recommend something else? Those people are very loud next door. So, any questions? Yes, no? Okay. All right, then if you have any other questions or wish for me to work on editing stuff, please let me know. I also want you to know that at the front desk and downstairs, if you didn't already grab one last time, I have the entry forms for the short story contest for the summer. Perfect. I was going to say I passed them out last time, but I don't know if all of you have them. If you are underage because you are a tween rather than a teen, and I have set the limit for 12, just let me know. Because of the fact that I am okay with it, because of the fact that you guys are in Writers Club. The only reason I set the age minimum as 12 is because of the fact that I know a lot of kids who are not 12 tend to not take it as seriously, but you guys are here. So obviously you're taking it seriously because you're here. So if you want to participate in the contest, just let me know and write on your little form your name, because it requires your name, but write on your little form what your actual age is, and I will just make sure to add you anyway, because of the fact that I realize that you're underage, but you're all working very, very hard. But for those of you who are above the age of 12, just circle whichever you are in. If you're 18 plus, you're technically an adult now.
and congrats.
Right. Craziness. But anyway, so as
Also
a
sucks because adult lives are expensive.
yes. Next week is Memorial Day, so we will not be having Writers Club because of the fact that it is Memorial Day. However, with Memorial Day happening, that is when your Writers Club stuff is due for this month, for the May contest. Is next week. No, yeah, I've had a lot of people turn them in today.
To write something.
I've had a lot of people turn them in today, so you're not the only person who thought that.
I don't have anything done.
So you're all good. Yeah, it's due next Monday because that's the last Monday in May. When you finish that, then just make sure you turn it in before midnight. I will try to send out a reminder, but please send it in. It always makes me sad that I get to the holidays, some of you forget, and then you don't send it in, and then I'm sad. I already have 2 sent in right now, Zach and Eliora. So as a result, I know I have 2, but if anyone else is going to submit, make sure you submit. All right. Yeah, I think we're good. And for those of you on the YouTube video, thank you.